Pardon me while I have a strange interlude. There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art. Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I am your host, AP Strange. This is my show, and today's show is brought to you by Canned Time. If you're ever looking for a little extra time in your day, I know everybody always wishes there was more hours in the day. You can't fit more hours in the day, but you can fit time in a can. And these canned time products are pretty great because you can always just open a new can of time, give yourself the time, take the time, and just keep the time for those times that you're really going to need it. It gets a little bit confusing if you talk about it further than that, but there it is, canned time, bringing you our program today, and it's going to be a really good program. This is going to be a lot of fun. I have a wonderful guest on today, Tess Martin. She's a visual artist, animator, and filmmaker. She's based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. She has a background in classical fine art and animation, and features at film festivals, installations at various museums, and lectures throughout universities in the US and the Netherlands. Um, and She is currently, I think, at the moment, featuring a film called Still Life with Woman, Tea, and Letter. It's a really moving film that I watched. That we're going to kind of go through a lot of concepts around art, time, animation, and this is going to be a great chat. So, welcome to the show, Tess. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to have you on because I guess your sister had reached out to me, and we kind of connected us, and this was uh, I was able to go check out your work and uh, really profoundly moved by it. It's really super interesting what you do, and I've always loved animation with physical objects.
hmm
Actually, uh, well, I mean, it's a little bit more on the lowbrow end, but the old Ray Harryhausen movies and stuff like that, I love
hmm
that, and I love anything that seems
Classic.
like there's a physicality to it. Yeah.
hmm
So, so I was wondering, where did your interest in animation start?
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to come back to you and ask you more about exactly what you mean by moved by the pieces because I'm just so interested in how people how people perceive it, and it's so rare to actually get to hear from a viewer, from like an audience member, their interpretation and their experiences of the pieces. So I'm definitely going to come back to grill you about that. But
Sure.
um so yeah, I was always into art as a kid, and I ended up studying fine art at the University of Brighton for my bachelor. And I had no, knowledge more than anybody about film or animation. It wasn't a thing I was into. I was doing like weird paintings and stuff, and um, I knew that what I was doing wasn't really like my specialty, but I didn't know what my specialty was. And then I saw a puppetry show that really changed my life in the summer between my first and second year of my bachelor. And that really inspired me. And I came back to art school and started making weird little paper cutout stop motion films, and basically never looked back, and I'm still kind of doing that. And that was, I realized recently that was almost 20 years ago when I graduated from my bachelor in 2007. So
Wow.
of course I've been doing, I've developed. But in principle, I think most of my work still has roots in frame by frame animation, or at least frame by frame film that has some kind of physical connection. And I do think that I think about animation quite conceptually, and I do think that's a result of my fine art background, as opposed to, someone who might have studied animation for their bachelor or film studies. I was always thinking about what the materials say about the piece, or like the method of presentation. So like really kind of taking everything into account. Um, yeah, and now I also do installations that involve videos. So, and often there will be an installation version and a short film version of like the same piece to be shown in
Mhm.
different contexts. So I tend to show at like film festivals and like film related, contexts, and then when I can, galleries or like exhibition spaces, like physical spaces, where the viewer is really like walking into a piece or around a piece, or
Yeah.
listening to something on headphones maybe, or there's different possibilities with every which way. So I really enjoy experimenting with all of those.
Yeah, it's very effective, and I definitely got that sense looking at your website and your list of works, because every several of them had the film, but also installation. And I was thinking, oh, well, if you go to the installation, that's you're kind of in the film. That it's a whole other experience,
Ideally,
basically. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's tricky because first of all, you need to like arrange for the installation, or you need to be invited by a curator to show it. So that's assuming you get that far. Um, there's I know people who are like, yeah, well, I mean, all this work to put up an installation, and then, like a very limited number of people may come through and see it, depending, of course, on the venue and how famous it is or whatever. But on the other hand, the experience people have is very direct and very, in a way, intimate.
mhm.
Sometimes more so than like if you're sitting in a cinema and it's your short film is like number 4 of a program of 8 short films. I mean, of course, the cinema, the black theater with everybody else around you can also be very special, but there's something much more kind of one-on-one about an installation context, where so at least those 20 people have seen your piece very directly,
Yeah.
which I appreciate. So I just try to do both, I just try to kind of do everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of nice when you have that immersive experience. And it's nice for me as an appreciator of art, and I've definitely had those times. Sometimes it's great not to be with the crowd and just have that personal one-on-one
Mhm.
interaction with it. I can think of times that we have the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and there's a gigantic stained glass window there
Mhm.
with Saint George slaying the dragon, and I got close to that, and it was just I was the only one in that little corner of the museum,
Mm.
but I was just fully in it for
Yeah.
a couple of minutes. Like I was just kind of transfixed, looking at all the little bits, and
Yeah,
there's
and that
something
that's
pretty great about
also,
that. Yeah, it's like a
yeah,
revelation. Yeah.
yeah, and there's something great about installations that the viewer can determine what to look at. And I mean, within certain parameters, like if you have a video piece, then, obviously unless it's a very special installation, the viewer isn't like pressing play. It's on a loop, or it's somehow determined by the gallery or the artist. But the viewer can walk around and focus on what they want to focus on, and they can
Hmm.
even stand there and watch it multiple times if they want. So in that sense, it's more flexible than a screening, and the viewer has more power over their experience, which, for better or worse, like
Yeah.
I know some artists who because of that may prefer the screening, because it's like, no, 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 I want people to start at the beginning and watch it till the end, and I want them to be like trapped in a theater, and I don't want them to be able to leave halfway through, which is
Right.
also something people can choose to do at an installation normally. So so yeah, it's I've grown to appreciate these questions about the viewer experience over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, I mean, having watched the films now, I certainly wish I could see one of the installations and actually walk around it. Because it seems immersive, and as you say, you have a certain amount of agency for
Mhm.
what part of it you're interacting with, or how much time you spend with it. Um,
Hmm.
so that's super cool. Uh, so I mean, leading up to your background in art, uh, I think I had read it somewhere in your bio about um, the themes that you tend to get into with. It seems almost like a liminality, or like a vulnerability of moving from different places and times, and remembrance, and that kind of thing. Certainly, you see that in still life with Woman, Tea, and Letter.
Hmm.
But but yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that at all, or get into any of your background, like personally, that
Hmm.
informs these
Yeah,
things.
sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, definitely my last three works really specifically deal with like our relationship to the past, and trying to connect with a moment in the past, or with people in the past, or thinking about yourself in a larger context. And For sure, Still Life with Woman, Tea, and Letter was I was working on that one and the next one kind of at the same time. So
Hmm.
the one that's very different, it's an 11-minute kind of experimental documentary called 1976 Search for Life. But they have a similar technique, which is this kind of photo replacement situation. And I had been developing this idea for the 1976 film, which is like directly related to a moment in my family's life in the summer of 1976, when my father took this trip to Scotland. But then that happened to coincide with the NASA Viking mission to Mars, which is when we got the first photos from the surface of Mars. And my dad talked about this event in his travel journal. So anyway, for that project, I started to like kind of literally think about different timelines colliding, or being able to cross over, or kind of thinking conceptually about this journey, this like attempt. So just like my dad's journey to Scotland, and the lander's journey to Mars, and my journey to this moment in my dad's life, trying to understand, trying to reach a destination, and all three journeys kind of end a little bit bittersweet,
Hmm.
because the NASA mission, though successful, because the landers, survived and took photos, didn't find life, which was, the larger objective of the mission. So that actually stopped the investment into Mars programs for a long time. And my father's trip, he was looking into family history and stuff, and trying to connect. And though there was a lot there, there was also, I think, evident in his journal, a bit of realization that this you can only ever get so far trying to connect with your ancestors, or where your people come from, so to speak. There's a limit to that because you will never know what
Yeah.
it was really like. And similarly, I will never really understand my father, at least at this point in his life, when his life was so different from mine. So he was a new father and he was younger than I am now, and really different priorities in life. And so that was where this idea came from. And I ended up, after years of research and like trying different things, I ended up realizing that I could turn some of the 8 millimeter like home movie footage that they had taken on this trip into like a series of photographs. And I could do the same with archival footage from the NASA missions, and then I could replace frame by frame these photographs in different locations in Scotland. So I took a trip and I did this kind of animation in the wild.
Yeah.
Um, and that's interesting, hopefully, because it produces kind of two timelines in one image where you're watching what's happening in the photograph, but there's other stuff happening at a different time speed in the environment around, whether it's like the clouds moving really fast or the sun, moving, or, the shadows moving, or like whatever.
Yeah,
So
I was kind of struck by blades of grass where you'd have the photo resting kind of in tall grass or on a stone
mhm,
with the tall grass around it. But they're
yeah,
just kind of twitching back and forth in different ways because the breeze is blowing it, Yeah.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
even the
So
photo itself moves slightly. It just kind of,
yeah.
yeah,
Yes, which
yeah,
is helpful in a way, because it's one of the ways that you are, in a way, being honest with the audience about what's happening. Like,
mm,
so there's no real trickery involved other than the basic trickery. You know what I mean? There's
right.
no like digital manipulation or anything. It's like, no, no, no. It's like literally just replacing photographs in the same place.
Yeah,
It's like actually quite basic. But of course, the choice of framing, the choice of landscape becomes very important, and the choice of which little looped looped series of photographs do you use in which place, and what does that say. And then of course there's this narration happening with the travel journal and stuff. So my point is, I had been developing this technique, and then I started to work on still life with woman, tea, and letter, and I realized that I could do something very short and hopefully very interesting. And I had the opportunity to make a 2-minute film with this special like funding scheme here in the Netherlands. So the brief was it had to be 2 minutes, and I was like, aha. And I had been thinking about my mother and letters I had been reading that she had written to her mother, like back in the 70s and the 80s. So I was already on this kind of family history trip, clearly. Um, and I think because the other film was really about my dad, I started thinking about my mom for
yeah,
this film. And I immediately had this idea for a still life painting, and she's an art history professor. So like I associate still life paintings with my mom just
mhm,
because, it's one of the areas of her expertise. So like anything art history or anything like that, I associate with my mom. And so I started thinking about this film that looks like a still life painting. And there is a letter on the table, which you also find in the history of still life paintings. Often there will be like an open letter, and there's different symbolism in these paintings that mean different things. Um, and then I realized I could have a photograph in the film as if someone had been looking at a photograph.
mhm.
And this photograph could contain also uh, a portrait of somebody. And so I started playing around with literally these two timelines, one very small physically because it's a very small photograph. But actually you see the performer, you see the actress. So like it's like clear what's happening. It's like a young woman sitting at a table reading, writing a letter and making a cup of tea. And then the larger scene around it is very up close. So it's like really close up to a table, and a woman enters, but we don't actually see very much of her because of the cropping. So it was this fun way to kind of allow questions to form about like which timeline are we in? Are we in the world of the photograph where
Hmm.
the letter is being written and the cup of tea is being made, or are we in the world of the reader where the letter is being read and the cup of tea is being drunk?
Right.
Um, so like these doubts I was very interested in, and the similarly neither timeline is like really true
Hmm.
because the frame world with the tabletop and everything is clearly moving faster than it should be. Like there's a candle that's moving down very fast, and there's a watch that's spinning around, and this lady who comes in is moving in a kind of jittery way, which is
Right.
um uh which is kind of real speed, but it's clearly manipulated. So none of what we're looking at is really fully 100% true or
Hmm.
real. And neither timeline is really quote unquote correct. And I really loved that. So I really wanted to play with this uh, creating doubt and questions and finding connections. And there's a lot of little connections between the different things, between the different worlds, and we worked on the timing of everything to make that happen. So like when the woman comes in with her own cup of tea, we might think, oh, is it the same cup of tea that was poured in the photograph that we just
Mm.
saw being poured? Is this the same letter that is being read as the letter that's being written? Um, yeah, so that's where it came from. And
Yeah.
we were talking about installations just before, and even though this film was finished in 2022, and I've always wanted to show it as an installation, but never got the opportunity to until recently. And I was really happy that I was able recently to do a little mini exhibition in Amsterdam. And it's the film on a monitor sitting on a table, but I wanted to find the perfect table.
Yeah.
Um, and I ended up finding a table that was very similar to the table at which the young woman is sitting writing her letter. This kind of wooden table with the two sides that kind of fold up and are like propped up by an additional leg.
Right.
So I was just super happy. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, looks amazing. So the table becomes part of it, and then you're wondering, like, oh, is this the table of the framing world, or is this? I don't know actually how many people noticed that it was similar to the table in the photograph, but I knew.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Well,
So
do you get a cup of tea at the installation?
this installation, I did have a little arrangement of objects, not on the table, but in a different place near the entrance, including a stack of the photographs used in the film. So it was kind of halfway between a kind of behind the scenes look at how the film was made, because these are the cards from the
Hmm.
film, and also their own little artwork. Connecting with the film, which was really fun. I've never been able to show like a stack of the cards, and I think it also helps visually for the audience to understand what is actually happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, I just talked for a while, but so what did you think of the film? Remember, I said I would come back to you.
Yeah, you did say that. Well, I mean, It's a lot to do with. It's interesting to me that you were saying that neither timeline is technically true, because I mean nothing is really except the here and now. We only have our memory to go on, or somebody else's memory, or a written account, or physical media like a photograph or a letter. Um, so there we live in a world of fictions anyway. It's a lot of we're surrounded by phantoms of the past constantly. Um, but to see these two moments in time playing out simultaneously, which in my weirdo conception of reality and time is how things work anyway. I think all things are happening
Mhm,
simultaneously all
mhm,
the time.
mhm.
We can't perceive of it that way because it would break our minds. But I think we intuitively know that. And you do feel like kind of a pang of recognition when you are encountering the past. And as you say, with your father's journey in search for life, it's almost kind of like search for a life that you can't go back to. Really,
Mhm.
you can try, you can get at the essence of it or pieces of it, but it's always going to be ephemeral. It's going to escape your grasp because you can never really go back there. So that's kind of what I
Yeah.
got out of it, was that these two moments in time are playing out simultaneously. For the
Mhm.
woman who's now older, reading the letter and having a cup of tea while the candle burns down quickly, she's reconnecting with that moment and living it in the
Mhm.
act of reading the letter, and with the recognition that this all might end soon. You know,
Yeah,
so
that's really, yeah, that's, like, super great. And it's like, I'm not sure that I, like, you know, verbalize this to myself at the time, but there is something of the, "How much longer does this woman have?"
yeah.
Because of the candle burning down primarily. Uh
Well, that and the music at the end, for whatever reason, the music that comes in,
Mhm,
that tone is very effective as the room darkens, because you're
mhm.
like, "Oh, this feels almost like a
Like a
church bell at a
swan
funeral."
song or something, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, indeed, indeed, and how, in that sense, if we're looking at it from her point of view, how fast time seems to be passing,
Mhm.
when you have little of it left. You know, yeah, super interesting. Like thinking about my own film anew. Um, but yeah,
Well,
the
that's the
whole
beauty of art, right? I mean, it's everybody's gonna perceive it a little differently. So
yes, yes, 100%,
yeah,
and that's what I hope. I mean, I hope that the viewer has thoughts about it, period. Like,
yeah.
I hope it has some sort of effect. And after that, it's really not my concern anymore.
Mhm.
It's really the viewer's interpretation and the viewer's experience. And of course I want to know what it is, but it's not like right or wrong or anything. Uh yeah. But it's interesting that you said that that you kind of think of all times happening at once anyway, and it's just that we can't perceive it that way because it would break our brains. Because that's kind of what I ended up focusing on for the most recent film, the house
Oh,
film. I
okay.
don't know if you had a chance to watch that one.
I did not,
Oh,
unfortunately, but I
okay, okay.
will. I
Well,
definitely
you'll
will.
you'll you'll go back and watch it now because it's a film called How Now House, which is I just finished it like last year and it's now starting its festival run. And it's like a 13-minute experimental documentary about this house that I lived in for 10 years in Rotterdam with housemates. And uh kind of thinking about the house as a time container, containing the time of all the previous residents who have lived there,
Yeah.
and including me and my housemates. So there's a lot of there's a historical angle. Like I did a lot of research into the house and the real people that lived there before. And then there's a kind of scientific angle, and I incorporated a lot of words written by Carlo Rovelli, this theoretical physicist,
Mhm.
who has written a couple very accessible books about time and how we perceive time that I recommend. Um, so really forcing, not forcing, attempting to think about a house this way, and we kind of see these people walking around, and there's this theme of playing cards in the film that is, it also kind of comes from this photo replacement technique that I described for the other two films, where it's, in those films it's like a video turned into a series of photographs. Well, in the How Now House film, it's just a stack of playing cards that are being sequentially changed. So like replace one card with the next card.
Oh,
And then these are shuffled. So it's like the frames of the film are shuffled along with the cards.
okay.
And there's like a card game happening in the film. It's apparently hard to describe, but but it covers some of these same themes that we're talking about, and it's more focused on kind of one building. So like what, thinking about like the block, what is it, the block universe theory of
Hmm.
time,
Yep.
um like within one house. So thinking about like the place as kind of a place for like a wormhole kind of, or like a gate.
Yeah,
um
and a deck of cards is an excellent illustration of that, given their use in fortune telling and things like that.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, but apparently the structure of a pack of cards is related. uh, this is what the internet tells me, is related to the four seasons and like the number of weeks in a year. So like there's 52 cards. This is a quote from the film. You'll hear it when you watch it. There's 52 cards in a pack of playing cards, and there's 52 weeks in a year, and there's
Hmm.
four suits, and there's four seasons.
Yep.
And traditionally also like the jack and the king and the queen like meant slightly different things, and the spade and the clubs like meant different things, I forget, but it's basically an illustration of a year of time.
Hmm.
So like as soon as I realized that, I was like, oh, well then I'll just use this pack of playing cards. But then what does it mean when people play a game of cards, if you're giving and taking cards, and there's some kind of rhythmic exchange, if
Hmm.
you're thinking about the cards symbolically as like time increments, then what does that mean when you're playing a game, you know
Yeah.
so these types of things all came together for this project. And I'm now actually working on an installation version of that project, which will be shown next month here in Rotterdam. So
Oh, that
that's,
sounds great. You're speaking my
Mhm.
language with the playing cards too, just because it's seems to be a running theme for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's I have a habit of finding rogue playing cards out in the wild. Occasionally, I'll just
Oh,
find
you're one
one
of those people.
and I take a picture of it when I see
Yeah.
it.
That's
But
amazing. That's
the,
amazing.
the most recent one was the Queen of Spades. I,
Ooh.
I'm told by others that this never happens to them. Like people are like, it's amazing that you always find playing cards because I've never seen one outside
I
somewhere.
I can't say that I have.
Uh,
No. No. Maybe a Joker, like one of the disposable
right?
cards.
Yeah, the
No.
ones that people throw away. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But not like not like one of the ones you need to play.
yeah. But
'Cause it just brings up so many questions, like how did this one card get here, and like what happened to the rest of the pack that is now useless? I mean, usually, more or less. There's some
well,
games where you don't need all the cards, but
that's it. I mean, I kind of half jokingly started posting them online, just referring to them as messages from the cosmos. And there's other things that will qualify as that if I find like a random cookie fortune, fortune cookie, like fortune,
hmm
stuff like that, or out of place objects or animals, can
right.
be that. But
Yeah.
and anything that you could divine meaning from. So,
hmm
like I said, you can use playing cards for divination. So there's a divinatory
Yep.
purpose there that could be a message. But I tend to think of it in terms of synchronicity. And with synchronicity, I like to think of those causal factors, like how did this card get here? Like what circumstance led somebody to drop a single card in this parking lot, or in this alley, or
Yeah.
in
Was
this
it like a
field,
magician doing magic tricks maybe?
Yeah,
You
and I mean, that's the other half of it is, I had to discount some of them in my case because I was teaching myself sleight of hand with cards at one point, and naturally, when you're learning, you drop them. I
Mhm,
still drop
mhm.
them. I never got good enough at it to not drop them, but, I'm certainly not doing them out in the middle of the field that I just walked to, like,
I would imagine
yeah.
not.
So if I find them in my house, they don't count, but,
Right.
uh
It's very honest of you.
but, yeah, when you think of that causality part of it, that that's what really leads you down a lot of these holes. Like when you conceive of it as an apartment or a house, you think of everything that's occurred within those walls.
Mhm,
And I think this it pertains a lot with people thinking of ghosts, like actual hauntings. But
mhm.
in other ways, it's just kind of the history. It's the energy that's there. Um, and I think
Yeah,
of this like I collect books, I'm a big book collector, and I
mhm.
always buy used if I can. So I always love thinking about, like,
Like,
who
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 had
had
this
this
book
book
before?
before?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Is their
Yeah, yeah,
imprint
the
still there?
life of this
Yeah,
book. Yeah, sometimes when I get a brand new book, I'm, like, weirdly disappointed, you know? I'm like,
yeah,
"Ugh." It's like, no one's had this before, like
yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, like, when at a certain point, I realized, "Oh, am I making a ghost story for the house for How Now House?" Because there's, like, literally figures walking around that aren't acknowledging each other,
Mhm,
and I was like, "Oh, is this a ghost story?" And then I realized, well, sure, you could call it a ghost story, but my point is like, well, if the historical residents are ghosts, then we are also ghosts because we're all the same. That was
mhm.
kind of the one of the points of the film was that we, the current residents, or at the time current residents, are not any more special than the people who've lived here before. And that doesn't make it any less interesting, right? It means
Mhm.
we are part of this grand tapestry. Um, so
Exactly.
if the older ones are ghosts, then the previous duration of time that we've spent there is also kind of a ghostly time, and we would also be qualify as ghosts, you know?
Yeah, but
Uh,
you're weirdly cognizant of it too, so I feel like you can bump up against your own history, in a
oh,
way that
for
you maybe
sure.
you can't with somebody that you don't know about. Or that
Mm,
hasn't happened yet. There's that other element to
yeah,
it where
there's
you can
the
see the ghosts of the
future.
future.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, if it's a block universe theory of time, then it also has the future in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's when, if you think about it too much, your brain explodes, like you said earlier. But I appreciate the attempt. So like all these things we're talking about, it's like they're all kind of impossible,
Uh-huh.
but we still, instinctually investigate them and want to go down these rabbit holes, despite the fact that our brains aren't necessarily designed to comprehend them. But I think the attempt is worthwhile anyway.
Yeah, I believe so, and I also believe that, bearing that in mind in our kind of three-dimensional or, maybe four-dimensional if you think of it that way, but in our perception of reality with our limited sensory perception and our ability to cognitively handle some finite amount at once, these are things that can only really be expressed obliquely. Like you kind of have to describe small parts of it through things like symbol or artistic expression of various kinds. And people
Yes.
get it. That's a way to communicate directly through pure emotional um, conveyance,
Hmm.
and in a way that you would never be able to with words. Language isn't suitable for it, right?
Yeah, interesting, interesting. Well, I tell you, when I started to think about this stuff, and then at a certain point, I realized I make time-based art.
Yeah,
So if you're making a short film, like as opposed to a video art piece that might be shown in a loop, like specifically from the beginning, if you're making a short film, you're assuming it's going to be watched from the beginning through the middle to the end. So, um, you know, we are slaves to this method of experiencing film, that's what I started playing with the house film, and kind
Mhm.
of shuffling the things around. But it's definitely still a linear experience, because at the end of the day we're humans, and that's how our brains work. So it was a really interesting balance to try to strike. Like, okay, I'm making a time-based piece, but it's talking about how time is not as secure as we think. So,
Yeah, but
so
even
how
the
do I make
process
this clear?
yeah, but
Mhm.
even the process of making it plays with time in a really strange way,
Mhm.
which is something that kind of occurred to me when I was trying to formulate a list of questions for you, was that, you talked about the making of still life with woman, tea, and letter, on your website. There's a separate video that's the making of, or, like, behind the
Mhm.
scenes, and it took you over it was about 9.5 hours straight of shooting, I think it
Yeah.
said. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, you think about how 9.5 hours becomes 2 minutes. Um, you
Yeah,
know?
well, that's what's so interesting about having an animation background, like, and I mean my type of animation background, which is frame by frame animation, because
Right.
whatever you do is time manipulation. You're
Yeah.
manipulating time. You're taking one frame. You're taking 24 individual frames over whatever any type of duration between 1 minute and a week. It might
Mhm.
take you a week to make 24 frames if you're doing a complicated sand animation. And then at the end, you have 1 second. So whatever you do, you're already in this world of like crafting the time
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that the audience will experience. So
And
when
you could say that your artistic medium is time.
I mean, indeed, any filmmaker could,
Right.
and in
Yeah.
that sense, any musician, and really any artist who makes any time-based type of thing. And in fact, I have only recently come around to the idea that even painters and sculptors who make still things could say that, because the time-based portion is the time that the viewer is looking at it. So the time the viewer takes to look at the painting is a
Mhm.
time-based experience. Um, you can't tell how long they're going to be looking at it, so you don't have much control over it other than trying, maybe you make it really big, and you kind of make it in that sense to try to kind of control where the viewer stands. But you could just walk past it in 30 seconds if you wanted. But this is something I only recently kind of came around to. And I used to be really bored by painting, and I still kind of am, to be honest. Because as an animator, you're just like, oh my God, it's just like one still frame,
Right.
like, whoop-de-doo.
Yeah.
You could make 23 more, and then you would have 1 second of like a very interesting moving painting. But now I've realized, actually, there's also something interesting in making a still thing that would capture an audience for a duration of time. Like that is also very interesting. So I'm thinking about that again. But yeah, so when still life with women, tea, and letter, to me it was a very natural thing, because
Mhm.
because I have this frame by frame animation background. So none of this was like, new to me. This idea of taking one still image every 30 seconds, which is what we did. So we set everything up, and then, light the candle, and then start shooting. And then we didn't stop for 9 hours, and we took one picture every 30 seconds. And that is how the candle burns down at a steady rate. And that is how the watch hands are going round, at an accurate speed. And then me and the other animator had to replace a photograph within those 30 seconds, which was like, enough time to do that. And then the performer, the older dancer who played the older woman, she had to perform and hold her positions for 30 seconds incrementally, which is called pixelation.
Right.
So she's only on screen for like what, 30 seconds or something, because she only comes in towards the end. But she performed for like an hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
And it wasn't easy because there's a moment where she's like sitting down. So you're kind of levitating. It's hard to hold, these positions.
Mhm.
And um, holding still is actually very difficult. So we did it twice because I knew something would go wrong the first time, and so always planned to do it twice. And that's good that we did because something did
Yeah.
go wrong the first time. But the second time, I actually changed her choreography a bit so she wouldn't be expected to be still for so long because it was just really hard to like it was too jittery.
Yeah.
So we kind of gave her more to do to like move the candle and move the cup and stuff. So yeah, indeed, it's a 9-hour shoot collapsed into 2 minutes and 15 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a very basic, simple thing, you know?
Well, you say that, but
I mean, it's funny because it's like it's barely animated. I mean, it depends, of course, how you define the word animation. But as someone who has also an animation background and who knows actual animators who are like actually very talented animators, which is not me. I mean, there's people who are way more talented than me when it comes to actually animating, like drawing out complicated movement at like the correct speeds and all of that. It's all we were doing was replacing the one photograph in the same place. and
all
then and
right.
then and then I was directing the dancer very specifically because obviously she wasn't used to doing this type of pixelation movement, so she needed very clear instructions on like how far to move each photo.
Hmm.
But other than that, it's very basic, quote unquote, animation, and
Yeah.
like the,
Yeah.
the woman that we hired to my friend Marika to do some of the photo replacement, she gets hired to like animate stop motion puppets on like feature films and stuff. And like here she was just replacing a photograph. It was really kind of rudimentary for what she can do. But then again, it has to be done very precisely. So it was also like quite important. So in that sense, it's
Yeah.
quite a simple, straightforward thing. It's just, I did have to do a ton of research into candles and how long it takes them to burn down,
Mhm.
because we needed it to burn down a specific amount. But after you do all that prep, then it's quite straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, some of that well, some of it definitely is mathematical, figuring out how many frames you're gonna
Yeah.
need versus the time that you're filming,
Yes. There's a lot of
but
math.
also the lighting, I thought the lighting was really impressive, the way it
Mm-hmm.
almost seems like, a shadow goes over
Mm-hmm.
periodically, and
Yep.
it almost seems like it's day and night, but you can tell by the candle burning and the watch that that's not what's happening. It's maybe
Mm-hmm.
clouds moving outside or something like that,
Yeah,
different
well,
parts of the day, the sun moving to different points in the sky, like
yeah, I
yeah,
think our objective was to kind of make it feel like it was going from dawn to dusk.
right.
And we had a lamp on a motion control slider.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so that's how that was moving incrementally every photo.
right.
Um,
So there's a
yeah,
lot of moving parts, I guess, is what I'm getting
yes,
at, and,
yes. There's a lot of little things all
yeah.
choreographed.
Yeah, and
Mm.
while you may downplay, like, the, animation type of it, that you're doing, it is also the composition of it and the concept behind it and the aesthetics of it, where it's the marriage of your fine arts background and
Hmm.
the animation craft, where it's a very unique product, and, like I said,
Oh,
I was
yeah,
moved by it. Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. I've had a couple women, uh, maybe my age or a bit older than me, come up to me and say that it really made them think about their mothers.
Yeah,
um,
I can see that.
which was very, amazing,
It made me
and
think of
makes
my
sense.
grandmother. Yeah, it
Your
made me think of my
grandmother.
grandmother a little bit because, well, she just passed away last year.
Mm,
Um, the way the hand moves on the table,
mm, yep.
and touching the letter, and it just kind of reminded me of my grandmother, like having. Oh, let me show you this picture. She's always keeping little
Yeah.
photographs from 40 years ago or something, and just handing it to you and putting it on the table and touching it and then backing away. Like
Yep, yep, yep.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, it's true how photographs are so, especially now. I mean,
yeah. That was
it's like,
definitely something I wanted to touch on. Is there's like a tactile and authentic
mhm,
aspect to physical media that doesn't seem to be present in the digital realm. Everything's digital now. Everything's on YouTube. The videos are on YouTube. They're not a physical disc or a tape that you can
mhm,
watch. It's like physical media, especially typified by a photograph or a letter or
mhm, or like a reel of 8 millimeter film or whatever.
yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
I think it's something that I wonder if you think that something gets lost by not embracing that as
I
much.
think I think it's something that I try to regain.
Yeah.
Um, because if you think about it, like if you think about the old slideshows, like in a slide carousel kind of
Hmm.
situation, you would literally have to first have your negatives, made into slides, and then you would have an event where you would invite people to sit down in a dark room, and then you would press a button to show one picture at a time.
Yeah.
It's like very intentional. And the same with old pictures. It's like, very intentionally posing for this one kind of expensive picture that is then going to be printed. So it's like special moment. And at the same time, I never used film, so I like came up at my art academy. There was no film instruction, like film, like 16 millimeter film.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, there was no film class on my bachelor at all. Um, so I've never actually used film. I mean, I've taken workshops and stuff, but I've never made a film on film. So I've always worked digitally, like with a digital still camera. So I've always taken high resolution digital images of my physical objects.
Mm,
So I guess I'm kind of in that sense in the middle, but I do in a way, that's why I still use physical materials at all, because I recognize the what it does when you are looking at a physical material. It's very accessible. It's very human. And
yeah.
that's why I think frame by frame animation persists at all, despite all the digital advances. And I used to live in Seattle, where Bruce Bickford lived. I don't know
Oh
if you
wow.
know Bruce's
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I know that
Yeah.
he worked with Frank Zappa a bit
Yeah,
in the
yeah. So
'70s.
he
Yeah.
he is kind of a local cult figure, but he worked all the time up until the day he died, I'm sure. And he was interviewed once at an event, and he was asked something about, like, why do you think frame by frame animation like is still good, now that we have all this digital animation. And he said something like, the fact that there are mistakes between the frames. So the fact that frame by frame animation is not super smooth, um, is what makes it good, because it is what makes it human, and it's
Yeah.
what makes the viewer identify with it. Whereas if it's all perfect, then it's not like relatable anymore.
Right.
And of course, his work was very much like that, clay, messy.
Yeah.
Even his
Yeah.
drawn, I have to say, his drawn work is, having said that, incredibly smooth.
Well, there's
Um,
a kind of a psychedelic quality to Bickford's work
yeah,
too, where
but
things are
indeed,
transforming and melding into each other, and
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes, and very, very like handmade,
yeah,
anyway.
right.
Um, so I think that's a little bit it's the same thing. Like, why use physical materials? I think it's the same thing. It's like, well, why do frame by frame animation? Because the imperfections are actually what allows people in.
Yeah, it's more effective in so many ways. Like I had heard a quote from I'm not sure which critic it was, but there was a movie critic that said that the computer graphics look good but don't feel real, and like
Hmm.
the frame by frame animation looks kind of bad in some ways, but it feels real because it feels like there's a
Hmm.
real thing there.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
yeah,
And
and I
of
mean I
course,
think about
now with AI, it's I'm sure completely changing. And I think over the past maybe 10 years, the technology, even before AI, the 3D technology has gotten so good that, Uncanny Valley like applies less,
right,
if you know what I mean. So like it used to be that 3D animation was like good, but like not perfect. And it was like weird. And that's where
yeah,
the term Uncanny Valley came from, that it was like unpleasant, to look at, because
right,
it was like trying to be real, but it wasn't. And it was like, ugh. Um,
yeah,
but now the technology is so good that I think young people, like when I teach, the students don't have the same reaction, because they have like a different starting reference point. So to them, it's so good that, and they don't get this ick.
yeah,
And now
yeah,
when AI first started, the weird AI videos that were like funny because they were slightly wrong, they had this similar kind of uncanny valley
yeah,
feel, where it's like weird, like what is going on? But the technology is moving ahead so quickly that perhaps that will also soon be gone, at least for the younger generation that's coming up behind us.
yeah, yeah. I
So
think
that'll
so.
be very interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see where things kind of go from here. I think before we were recording, I was talking about how I feel like there's probably going to be a return to some kind of authenticity with this stuff because people are really going to burn themselves out, or perhaps already are. you know,
Mhm, mhm,
so
mhm. Yeah, like
um,
a reaction against it back towards human human art.
right. Yeah,
Uh,
or even just physical things that you can
mhm.
hold and see, and
Yeah,
encounter, deal with directly.
yeah.
I mean, all it would really take, I think, is one big solar flare to knock out all the
Ah,
power
fingers
grids.
crossed, eh?
Well, I don't want that to happen specifically, but
Digital
if
chaos.
if it did, people would
Hmm.
have to entertain themselves somehow. It's
Hmm.
like,
That's where the
um,
playing cards come in. Um,
and that's
it
what
was,
would happen. I would
yeah,
think about like going camping with my family when I was a kid.
yeah,
If it was raining out and you couldn't have a campfire, well, take out the deck of cards. We're going to
yep,
play cards. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's something very interesting about the ritual. I'm never great at it, though, I have to say. Like, I'm not like a talented card player. Like, I need to focus too much, and I'm not quick enough. But I still enjoy it. But it's a good thing I'm not super competitive.
Yeah. Well, just, stay out of the casinos because that could be trouble for
No,
you if
no
you
problem. No problem.
don't.
Mm.
So, what are you working on currently? You got a film that you're in the works now. Uh,
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you were talking about maybe a return to physical objects, that you can like touch and hold and stuff. Because the film that I'm working on now, it's a short fiction film. So in that sense, it's different from the work we were talking about because it's like completely scripted. And it's kind of a science fiction film. It's kind of a multiverse story about a traveler who is tasked with following around people at their moment of death. And then she starts to empathize with humanity. But part of the plot is she carries around this little purse that is like bigger on the inside and filled with objects that are like that she's pilfered from
Hmm.
different places and times. And they work in this film, they work as kind of a marker like of that time and place that she can go back to if she wants. So kind of like an address. But I was thinking about this idea of like objects, little objects, and like, like we were talking about before, like who owned the book before, who owned this before, what is the history of this object, and why do we as humans kind of collect these things? Like, why are we attracted to this idea of these little objects and what they mean, and where they were made, and all this stuff. So that's where that plot point for this film came from, because I was fascinated by this, and the
Hmm.
character is using these to travel, but it's also a marker of how she's beginning to empathize with the humans that she's following, because she herself starts to feel attachment to these little objects that represent the different people that she's observed. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's funny that I just realized that there was this plot point about objects in my film. But it's yeah, I haven't gotten to that those scenes yet. So I still need to figure out exactly how I'm going to animate those. But the rest of the film is like a multi-plane animation photo cutout film with like lots of little different, pieces of paper that are different props, and then the actors are actually actors that were filmed in live action and then have
Hmm.
been turned into like a series of paper cutouts. So in that sense, it's also not really animated in the classical sense of the word, because all the character animation was done by the actors.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I'm kind of I'm manipulating and compositing their performance into this kind of universe.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's great because, like you said, you're kind of the master of time doing that because
Hmm.
it's not classic animation in the sense that you're starting from scratch with it, but you are you're taking what is essentially sequential linear images and mixing it up a little bit, recontextualizing it.
Yes.
So making it
Exactly.
physical and then making it a living linear progression again. And
Yes.
yeah,
I should write that down. Use it for the synopsis.
yeah.
Yes,
Well,
recontextualizing. Exactly.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I love this idea that she has a purse that is much bigger on the inside. Um,
Hmm.
because I had made a note in my questions as well. Because as much as you're playing with concepts of time, the corollary to that is space. And I mean, you could take that in a number of different ways, especially with the Search for Life film, where you're talking about going out into outer space to visit
Hmm.
Mars. At the same time, revisiting like the interior life of your father and
Hmm.
his quest, which
Yep.
in turn is seeking out his roots.
Hmm.
So there's this idea of like inner space and outer space, and how to play within that kind of uh, spatial set, you know?
Yeah, indeed. And I hope that this film I'm working on now will evidence those themes also. It's different because it's more of a kind of linear film with like characters and stuff. So in that sense, it's less conceptual than, 1976 Search for Life. Even though this would make my producer laugh, because the film I'm working on now is not like conventionally made at all. So having
Yeah.
just said it's more linear and less conceptual, it all depends where you're starting from, right? Um, but I do think it's in there, and I very much enjoyed kind of a more literal approach for this film, kind of literally depicting, a different version of New York in 1986, like to make clear that it's a multiverse situation, like this type of writing and communication that needs to happen, uh, with plenty of opportunity for play within it. Um, so it's been fun so far, but um, I'll still be working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
So we'll see what I think of it in a year.
Yeah. Well, I certainly look forward to it, and I look forward to looking at or watching How Now House, since you were kind enough to send me that link, which
Hmm.
didn't have time to check out before we get on today, but
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
will now
problem.
because time isn't real. So I'm already
Exactly.
watching it. I'm
Time is a
already
construct.
yeah, I'm already watching it in a different plane. If you
Yep.
zoom out a little bit. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. Um, all right. Well, I feel like this has been a really excellent chat. I'm thrilled that we got to cover a lot of these subjects because, as you might have uh, figured out, time has kind of been an obsession of mine for a long
Hmm.
time, which is a weird way to say that.
Yes. Appropriate way.
Ever since I was young, I've always, wrestled with these ideas and had
Hmm.
um, concerns about time travel. I've always wondered about that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
um, having had my own experiences that bordered on like premonitions as a kid that made always
Hmm.
made me wonder how that worked. How is
Hmm.
that possible, right?
How could that be? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So it's been a complete joy to be able to unpack this through through first watching your films and then kind of discussing them. So
Yeah. 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 Super great. I don't really get to talk about them in this much detail.
right, yeah.
So yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I very much appreciate you coming on. This has really
No,
been
thank you for having me.
so if people want to find your work online and follow what you're up to, how best can they do
Mhm.
that?
So there's a lot of stuff on my website, tessmartinart.com. I have a email newsletter that you can sign up for if you want, to receive an email.
Yeah, yeah,
Then there's if you are at certain film festivals, you may see the latest film soon. Next summer we will probably put the 1976 film online. I'm thinking about maybe starting a Substack, but I don't know. I still need to like research how to go about it. But the yeah, and Instagram unfortunately still
yeah. Right.
is a good place to hear all the latest news.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, I encourage listeners to definitely go check this stuff out. Find Tess online, and at least the still life with woman, tea, and letter is available to view on
Yes.
your website.
Yes.
So,
Hmm.
and then you can watch it behind the scenes that
Hmm.
we're the video as well.
Yes.
So,
Mm.
um, so listeners definitely check that out. And Tess, thank you once again for coming on the show.
You
This
are
has been
very
a blast.
welcome.
Yeah. All right. I'll
Mhm.
talk to you
Okay.
soon.
Yep. Bye.